Back in 1980, I had an experience that took me down a road of 13 months of constant fear, panic attacks, depression, doubts, which I'd never experienced before. And I cried out to the Lord to ask Him to show me how to get out of this, how to stop it. I didn't know what had hit me. And the night before the bottom fell out of my world, there's a prophet who came to our town, and he had Heather and I stand up, and he prophesied over us, and he prophesied Philippians 4:8. He said, this will help you with mental oppression, depression, anxiety, fears. And I didn't think that was for me. I felt like I lived on the sunny side of the street. He also gave us promises about finances, and this was the beginning of a special walk by faith where we were without any financial means of support. And so I was focused on that promise, and I thought maybe Heather was feeling anxious and that Philippians 4:8 was for her. Well, it turned out when the bottom fell out of my world and I was racked with fear like I'd never experienced before, I'd be literally bouncing on the bed. I cried out to the Lord and I said, Lord, help me to know what's happening. He felt like he was a million miles away. I couldn't feel his presence, had a hard time hearing his voice. But there's this moment where I really cried out to the Lord, and I thought the Lord, this idea came to me. I thought it was the Lord that said, I've already spoken to you about this. And I was shocked. I couldn't think of anything that he has said about this awful situation that I was in. Then it came to my mind that prophet said something about mental oppression. I got up from that prayer time. I ran and went and got the cassette tape of the meeting, listened to it again, and for the first time had hope that there's a way out of this thing. I can recover from this thing. As it turned out, I didn't know what Philippians 4:8 was talking about. It's basically think on these things. I took every word, wrote it out, started with a Strong's Concordance, trying to take it apart to understand what it was. I couldn't get it. I just couldn't understand where my freedom was in this verse. I couldn't get it. I cried out to the Lord and I said, Lord, help me to understand this. He said, think on these things. Think on the things that are lovely. And so I would imagine a fawn in a meadow, buttercups. And I thought, boy, if I have to think about that every day, all day, I'll really go crazy. And I cried out to the Lord, and I thought he was telling me that I needed to think on those things about other people. So I actually wrote out the scripture, and I put it in my shirt pocket, and it became my focus. And I found that my mind tend to be critical, negative. I'd go to church, and I'd see everyone's faults, everything I knew about them that was faulty. All the things I didn't like about them. And I found by comparison with what was on this little card, think on these things, by comparison, I was a very negative person. I was very critical. And so I would have to get a hold of that thought and pull it down and replace it with a positive thing about that person. And it was laborious. It was intentional, very, very difficult to do. I didn't even think I could do it. I had to do it. My freedom depended on it. And so I had to discipline my thinking in a way that I hadn't ever had to do it before. And so I started thinking positively about other people. And I gained a measure of freedom. And I went back to the Lord and I said, Lord, what else is in this verse? What else would bring me freedom? And he says, I want you to think on this list concerning yourself. And that was a real struggle. Think on the things that are commendable. Think on the things that are good about me. Boy, things I'd get a reward for. I couldn't. I was so self-critical, so negative, so hard on myself. I felt like Jesus was saying, you're harder on yourself than I would ever be. I didn't love myself, and he showed me that. I called myself stupid. I berated myself. I had this inner dialogue about myself that was constantly negative. And the Lord showed me that I won't be able to properly love other people if I don't start loving myself, forgiving myself, cutting myself some slack. I was so legalistic, so strict, so harsh on myself that it was creating, eroding a base of love that I needed to have in order to stop the fear. So I started thinking positive things, and boy, it was a challenge. I remember the first time I tried to do it, I thought, well, at least I haven't killed anybody. I don't lie anymore. I don't steal anymore. I couldn't think of anything positive about me, and I had to work at that, and it took months. And I gained some freedom. As I went down that road, I definitely gained some freedom. I was getting there, but I wasn't completely free. I went back to the Lord and I said, Lord, what else do you want me to do? How else can I apply this verse? And I was shocked to hear the Lord said, I want you to think on this list about me. Well, I love Jesus, but I really didn't like God. I didn't like God of the Old Testament. I didn't understand them. I couldn't understand how someone could reach out to steady the Ark of the Covenant and fire would come out and fry them. I realized by comparison, as I thought on this list about God, I compared it to my thinking. I saw God as an angry old man. I saw him as cheap, easily angered, impatient. And God showed me that the way I was thinking about him was completely wrong. And he's merciful. And over the next few months, as I looked for verses that describe God differently, even the God of the Old Testament, he said, all these commandments are for your good. David said, oh, how I love your commandments. And he saw the mercy of God in everything God wrote. I started looking at the Old Testament through David's eyes, and I also could begin seeing God as gracious and merciful. And I found out that the I Am of the Old Testament, who led the children of Israel out of Egypt, was Jesus. And it changed how I saw God. Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And so God rewrote, using Scripture, changing my thinking, and I tapped into grace that I didn't know was available. I began to see God differently. That helped me to see myself differently. That helped me to see other people differently. Brought an enormous amount of freedom to my life. I still wasn't 100% free. I went back to the Lord and I said, Lord, if there's anything else in here that you want me to see, that you want me to change, I'm more than willing. I want more freedom. And I felt like the Lord was speaking to me, and he was saying, I don't ask you to do these things unless I do them myself. This list is what I use to think about you and to think about other people. I couldn't imagine how God could see all my faults, my flesh, my failures, and not keep track of it. And he said, well, I see it, but I don't meditate on it. I know it's there, I recognize it, but it's not what I'm rolling around in my mind. It's not what I'm keeping track on. The word think had to do, it was an accounting term where you'd actually keep track of something. And God's showed me in 1 Corinthians 13, it says, love thinketh no evil. He spoke to Jeremiah, says, I know the thoughts that I think toward you. They're good, not evil, to give you a hope and a future. And I caught a glimpse of something that marked me, that changed my life, that God thinks on those things that are positive about us. Even though I see my flesh and I see what it wants to do, and it's a constant struggle to keep it down. But that's not me. Me, my spirit, I love God. I love the things of God. I love the people of God. I love the church. And that's me. That's the real me. I do have a fallen nature that's inclined toward everything that is opposed to God, but that's not really me. And so I walked out one day. I walked out in the freedom. I can't say that I've been 100% walking in this. That would be a lie. But I always have something to come back to when I find that my feelings are too negative. My thinking is cloudy. My my thinking is detrimental to my spiritual life, I have to go back to Philippians 4:8 and find the discipline to get back to a different way of thinking, different way of meditating. Hope this has been helpful for you. God bless you.